Hello everyone, I hope you all are doing well. So the topic of today's discussion we have here is server-side template injection. Before we get started with the vulnerability itself, let's try to understand what are templates. So templates are a mixture of fixed data, so it can be layouts or pages, and dynamic data. So it could be variables which are being replaced into the layouts for changing or to bring dynamic content to the web pages. So when the application is used, the template engine replaces the variables contained in the template with values relevant to the situation. So it could be as per the scenario, like what user is seeing the page, or uh, or like it could be as per the scenario that is to be recreated, right? And what it will do is it will transform the template into a HTML web page and then send it to the client. So now that we have understood what are templates, so how do we identify if a website is built using a template engine? So some parts of the website, if you see, are static and some parts are dynamic. You can have a guess, like it might be using a templating engine in the background in the server side. And one another thing is we can also use browser plugins like Vapalizer to check if it is able to detect if any templating engine is being used. So what it will do is it will use the HTML source code to understand or like to find clues regarding any information disclosure about the backend itself, and we can get an idea if the website is using a template engine in the background. Also, what we can look at is headers or error messages, things like that. All right. So let's come to the vulnerability now. So the vulnerability that we have here is server side template injection. So what happens during this vulnerability is whenever a user input is being used by the templating engine to create a template, it is possible that user will be able to send some malicious input which will be interpreted by the templating engine as the code itself and execute the code. Means the user input fields will be executed by the templating engine, and uh, it will result in vulnerabilities related to code execution or changes in the server side code. Okay, so let's have a look at this vulnerability using an example. What we have today here is a application that is doing a search operation on a database and giving us the results. Okay, so what we can do for starting our testing is we can put some inputs in the search fields and see how the application behaves. So we can use special characters, normal characters. So if we use a single quote, again we can use other characters, and we can see that we are receiving a similar response. So let's try to enter dollar, and what we can see here is an error occurred and we have used some banned characters. So there is some filtration being performed by the application to not allow dollar. Maybe we can try percentage. Also you can see it is one of the banned characters again. Okay, so what we can do is we can also automate this testing process. of testing the all characters and how application behaves for different characters by using tools like FFUF. You can find it on GitHub. And based on the response that we receive, the length of the response, we can filter out what are the odd responses and have a look at the characters which are producing these odd responses. And based on the on checking the response itself, we can try to understand if we are able to do some injection or what are the uh, possible options that we have. Okay, so before we move on, let's have a look at the source code itself to see why the characters are being banned and how exactly is the application working with the input that we send. So this is the main controller.java file that we are having a look at, and it is the file that is actually receiving our input and processing it for the response. So as we can see here, there are some multiple parameters that are being accepted. So we have here author, it is not a required field. It's of type string. There's an object of model. Here we have an if statement. If we mention the author, if we don't mention the author, the no author will be added as an attribute to object model. Here we have a model object and it is adding attributes of key value pairs. Here what we are interested actually is the search functionality, because we are trying to search something, and the parameter that we are sending is the name parameter. Okay, so if we don't mention anything, if it is an empty parameter, let's try to see what happens. As you can see, it says search for Greg, and if the name parameter is empty, it will set it as Greg. So here what again we can see that uh, it is storing our search field, whatever we search, after running it through this function and saving it inside a query. So let's have a look at this function again, what it does. So here we have no words, so it's like percentage, underscore, dollar, and this one. So if we are using any of these characters, what we have in response is error occurred, banned characters. I think we just saw it a couple moments back. If we use dollar, we have error occurred and banned characters. Okay, all right. So here we have, if we use any of these, we will be receiving a error response, and this is how the main part of the code is working, like the page that is processing our search functionality. Okay, so again here we have the actual search functionality. So whatever query is that we search for, it will be searched in the database itself. Here is the database, and based on what we will receive the results if we have any successful results for the response for the search. So let's try to move on with our exploitation part and try to see what we can do. So I will search here for a single opening bracket, curly bracket, and what we can see here is a white label error page. To understand about this, what we can do is just a normal Google search of the error page that we have. So just by Google search, what we can understand is this is a generic Spring Boot error page that is displayed when no custom error page is present. So by the error page itself, what we can understand is it is a Spring Boot application, and you must be already aware, like Spring Boot uses and supports templating engines also. But still, what we have an understanding as of now is it's a Spring Boot application. Going back. So now that we saw that our application is responding with an error page for a curly bracket uh, input, what we can think of here is server-side template injection vulnerability. So before moving on to the exploitation, what we can do, we will try to understand like how it is possible to find out uh, what kind of payload will work in a server-side template injection vulnerability. To find a working payload, what we can do is again use FFUF to fuzz a list of payloads in the current parameter that we have. And also you can find a lot of websites like this one to get a list of different types of payloads that are available for SSTI. So as you can see, we have a lot of different types of payloads available. Okay, so using these payloads, we can fuzz it uh, for receiving a response. And the one that worked for us was, if we put similar payload, what we see in the response is the calculation of the query that we have put. So from this we can understand that whatever input we are entering in this field is being interpreted by the code and executed it, and based on that we are receiving a response. Okay, so let's dive into the code now to understand how exactly is the application vulnerable and why is our expression being executed and how it is being executed. Okay, so before we run the payload, let's start debug, put some breakpoints in the application. So first breakpoint that I have put here is in the model add attribute. So this is where our payload is being we will be able to see that inside the this key value pair in the query variable, our payload will be there. And also I have placed a few more breakpoints in different important places that we will be discussing further. Okay, so now that we have our first breakpoint hit, what we can see here is the name variable in the here is the payload itself, and after running it through the filter function, it is being stored in the query. So now our query variable has the value of this one that we enter. Okay, so let the program continue. Okay, so we have our next breakpoint hit. So this is the render fragment. Okay, so what this function does is Render fragment allows us to provide a segment of UI that can be rendered by the template components. Okay, so let's step into this function and see what it does exactly while processing the components which will be rendered by the templated components. This is the function implementation itself. As you can see, it is creating a map of the input, along with that some more variables that it had taken from the main controller.java from here. Okay, let's keep moving with the code. Okay, so we have our next breakpoint hit again, and what we can see here is it is running our input or or the uh, or the parts of the expression itself that are under our control. So it is doing some pre-processing on it. From this function we can understand that it is doing some pre-processing. So what does this function do is it is passing the middle parts of the expression. So the by middle parts what we mean is uh, from the entire expression for the template there will be parts of the template, parts of the expression. So as of now we can see the no author part is equal to 2 is being pre-processed. So there are different parts of the expression, and out of which part by part pre-processing is done, and some of the parts are under our control as end users and some of the parts are being supplied by the code itself. So this is a part supplied by the code. So part by part pre-processing will be performed, and in the end the entire expression will be processed. Okay, so let's see what are the other parts that are being processed. Okay, so I have also set a breakpoint on the result to see exactly what we are uh, getting after the pre-processing is being completed. Okay, now that the author is equal to no author is equal to true was processed, so next that we have is query. So again, if we just have a look at the main controller, so we had the no author part which was from here, yes, and now we are working with the query. As you see here, The variable expression evaluator is the Spring EL. So it is the Spring expression language. Okay. So before we move on, like let's see just what about something about Spring expression language. Okay. So searching on Google regarding the Spring expression language and reading through the documentation of Thymeleaf, because again, if you see in the code, we have Thymeleaf view class. Okay. So based on that, I was able to understand like this is using Thymeleaf engine, templating engine, and it is using Spring expression language for evaluation of the input that we are providing. So what we can read over here is most Thymeleaf attributes allow their values to be set as or containing expressions. So the payload that we had provided was just a type of expression which was evaluated by the template engine itself, and we received a successful response. So the payload that worked for us was this one, and it is safe to assume that we were able to inject a selection expression. And what we can understand from this is selection expressions are just like variable expressions. So except that they will be executed on a previously selected object instead of the whole context variable map. So previously, what we mean by previously selected object is, so here is the previously selected object and this is the expression. So book.title will return what is the name of the book, probably in this example. Okay, coming back to the code. As of now, what we are able to understand is it is saving the input inside the query. So now the expression that it is pre-processing is this expression. Okay, inside that we have again two expressions, this one and this one. So this is the expression that is being pre-processed as of now. And what we received as a result of this one is, this is the value. Okay, the pre-processing is in this phase that you have searched for, and this is the expression that has still not been pre-processed yet. Okay, this is the part of the expression that has still not been pre-processed. Again, first part is being processed. And we have first part plus second part. I believe we have missed the execution of uh, our expression. So what we can do is we can just redo the search again and try to observe. Let's try 7 and 2 and 9 maybe. We have our first breakpoint hit. Let the program continue. Okay, we have the query. So I believe in the next step we will be having the pre-processing of this expression by the Spring expression language. Okay. So now we are moving like through the code step by step how it is executing. As we can see, this is the first part of the expression. Second part, and they will be evaluated pre-processed differently. So this is the part we are interested in because it is the part that we have control over. So as you can see over here that we have received the value of 63. So it was successfully executed by the Spring expression language. This was the expression. It was executed by the Spring expression language in the pre-processing part, and we have our expression evaluated and the value you can see over here. So now we will disable the breakpoints and let the program continue. So as you can see, we have the desired result, and we can confirm that this search parameter is vulnerable and can be exploited. So going back to the documentation, one thing that I would like to highlight again is in selection expressions, what it says is just like variable expression, except that they will be executed on a previously selected object instead of the whole context variable map. So the main part is it will be executed on the previously selected object. So what we can understand from this is we have some power of execution on a selected object. Okay. So before moving on to the further steps of exploitation, let's try to understand a few basic concepts that we will be using in the steps ahead. So let's try to understand what we can do if we can control an object. If you know already, object in Java can be used to access the methods of the class that it belongs to. Also, object class is the parent class in Java. All classes in Java directly or indirectly inherit the object class. So what is inheritance? So inheritance is an object-oriented concept in which one class uses the property and behavior of another class. So what we try to understand here is we have control of an instance of object, and all other classes who inherit object will be accessible to us. That is like all the classes in the code that we are working with. So let's try to understand this with an example in our case and see uh, what is the class that the object we can control belongs to. Okay, let's try to get the class of the object. We can do that by just running a get class method on the object itself, and you can do this for relatively any object in Java, and you should get the class. So this is the class. Okay, spell context map wrapper that we have over here, and its object is something that we are able to control. Also, it is possible that we can access other classes as well. So as of now, what I have done is I have provided an empty string over here and tried to get class of it. If you see, it is the class is this Java lang string. Also, what we can do is we can also get the base class of the class. For that, what we can use is get superclass, and as we discussed a couple minutes back, that it is the Java lang object. So this is the parent class of all the classes. So what we can do in the context here is we will try to access other classes using for name to enumerate what all classes are we able to access in the current code context. Okay, so as we saw, like the class that we had in the response previously, lang string and the spell class, Spring expression language class are already there. Let's try to enumerate other classes also that that are there. Okay, using for name. So here we mention the class that we are looking for. So some of the generic classes that should be there are like string, date. As we can see, we have access to this date class as well. It is present in the code. Mm. Also, let's see what happens if we enter some class which does not exist in the code. Okay, so I will just put a random name here. If you see, if we enter a non-existent class or some class which we do not have access to, we will receive an error page, while if we enter a class that is available to us, it will give us a response with the name of the class. Okay, so one more researching previous vulnerabilities related to server-side template injection in Java, what we found is there are some classes which can be used for executing code and like runtime. So let's see if we have access to such a class. As you can see, we do have access to runtime. So now that we have understood like what all classes we have access to, what we can do in the next step is try to get methods uh, available to us of those classes. So again, the same syntax, and what the function that we are using method is get methods. And here is the uh, first method that we are trying to get. Okay. And the first method that we have access to is the before one. It's named before. So here we are using toString to have the response in the string format. Again, the next method, if we try to see, it is the after method. Again, what we can do is the third method is get seconds. So these are the different methods that are available to us inside this class, and all these methods will be accessible to us, and we can also you know uh, pass them parameters with inputs. Again, let's have a look at get methods for runtime. Runtime class. Here we have exit, which accepts parameters as integer. So we have version, and similarly we will have different methods. Okay. And again, as I said, like researching the other vulnerabilities, the method that I found accessible and exploitable was again the runtime and the exec method. In exec method, what we can provide is the payload or the command itself, the shell command that we want to execute. So now that we are working on a Linux server, we are using a command which will correspond to the same. And let's see if the command will actually get executed. So what I have done over here is I have started TCP dump on the loopback interface, and we are monitoring for ICMP traffic. And what the payload that we have provided here is ping 3 pings to the localhost. Okay. Now that we search for the payload or the malicious input, we are able to successfully execute the ping command, and here we can see that we have received the pings successfully, and we were able to achieve or run system commands or shell commands on the target vulnerable system. All right, so this would be it about exploitation and understanding the server-side template injection vulnerabilities. But now that we have got the vulnerability, exploited it, how do we fix this vulnerability? And it is a bit of a difficult part, because sanitization is one method of fixing this vulnerability. So what we can do is like we can implement a logic in the code itself for detection and removing potentially malicious content before using it in the template itself. And to do this, There are various methods like use of regex or whitelist of allowed characters or authorized expressions, etc. And also sometimes as per business requirement, if we have uh, you know to allow certain characters, it's difficult to implement. Also other option that we can use is logicless templates. So logicless templates will what they will do is they will separate the visual rendering and code interpretation part separately. So the code will not be using the inputs from the user for processing. It will only save it like in a database, and the template will be created differently, and later on the inputs from the database or like whatever user inputs, they will be uh, you know placed in the templates and then shown to the client. So these are a couple of methods using which we can fix this vulnerability. Okay, so I think this will be it for today. Hope to see you guys next time. Thank you.